Welcome everyone to the NEMSIS V3 implementation call. Today is August 12th. We appreciate you being here with us. This meeting is being recorded. We post it on our Facebook, or not our Facebook, on our YouTube site and also on our website. So in case you miss a call or there's a section where we have lots of discussion and you want to go back through and listen to it, those are available for you to review at a later date. Let's go ahead and move down to the agenda. These calls are intended to be participatory. So as we work through this agenda and as we have these discussions, if you've got questions or concerns or comments, you are welcome to unmute your microphone and chime in. You can use the chat feature, as you guys so brilliantly demonstrated already. Chat feature works and we watch those comments. And we also capture the chat. So if there are things that you throw in there that we don't get to, which we do try really hard to get to it all, but just in case, we do review all of those to make sure that we're aware of your comments, questions, suggestions, all that great contribution that you all have to these conversations. We sincerely appreciate it. We did make a few tweaks to the agenda, so this isn't the exact agenda that you got in your email inboxes last week, but it's pretty close. We are going to start out with Laurel. She's going to take our first two topics for IT issues. So Laurel, it is all you.
Awesome. Thanks, Julianne. So the first topic is maintenance. So this month we don't have any maintenance. No downtimes, nothing. Next month, however, we will have some minimal server patching. Again, there's no expected downtimes that I've been made aware of. So that's our maintenance update for this month and next. Next is software recertification. So as I'm sure you all recall, NEMSIS is now requiring software vendors to recertify every 2 years for versions 3.4.0 and higher. So what this means is when this policy goes into effect on January 1st, 2021, anyone whose recertification was 2 years ago or further will need to have recertified by that date in order to remain compliant. So this will encompass almost everyone who is certified on 3.4.0. So you can find your original certification date on the NEMSIS website under Technical Resources, Compliant Software Testing Status. So I'm just going to share that screen real quick. So I'm sure you're all familiar with this page. So you can select the version for 3.4.0, and then you can find your name on the list. A good number of folks recertified in late 2019, early 2020 to meet some California requirements. It didn't share. There, hopefully you see it now. Yeah,
yes.
Do we see my screen? Okay, good. Zoom's doing strange things today. So here's the list. Select version 3.4.0, and then we have your original compliant date, as well as recertification dates for those who recertified in late 2019 or early 2020 to meet a California requirement. So for many of these companies, if your recertification date is, say, in 2016, you will need to recertify in order to maintain NEMSIS compliance by the end of this year. If you're trying to meet California requirements, their requirement is once per year. So your date may be fast approaching based on when you recertified in 2019 or 2020. So that's where you can find your information. If you have any questions, I also have a list of vendors who need to recertify this year to meet NEMSIS requirements. And I'm just going to read through that list real quick. It's based on the company information that you provided to us when you originally certified. So if your names have changed, that might not be 100% accurate, but for receive and process vendors, we have Digital Innovation Inc., Beyond Lucid, Cloud PCR, Consilience, R1 RCM, and World Advancement of Technology for EMS and Rescue. For collect and send vendors, we have Action Ambulance, Alpine Software, Application Data Systems, Computer Investment Advice Inc., Creative EMS, EOS Logic, Lancet Technology, SCM Products, CAPS, Cloud PCR, Documed Systems International, EMS Consultants Inc., MacroLogic Inc., Medusa Medical, ProPhoenix, RAM Software Systems, Rescue Medic, ERS, SafetyPad, Star West Tech, Tyler Technologies, and OCI Software that will need to recertify by the end of the year. I'm sorry, I don't have a list to actually display for that. I'm just sort of reading it off of an internal page. But again, if you're curious about what your status is, you can always send an email to me and I will let you know when you need to be recertified by it, or you can just check that compliance software testing status page and see when your last certification date was. So for most of you, you will just need to complete it by the end of this year. And I would encourage everyone, as I encouraged people last year, to please schedule your appointments early, start the testing early, so that you have plenty of time to complete it before the year's end, and so that we don't have really a lack of appointments at the end of December. December can be a busy month with the holidays, so let's not all wait until the last minute when there aren't enough employees available to complete the testing. Yeah, so some of the vendors I listed are currently in progress. So if you're in progress, that's great. That's exactly where you want to be. And if you're ready to get started and you would like to be in progress soon, you can fill out the compliance application on the compliance page of our website under technical resources, or you can just send me an email and I will get you set up with the test cases for recertification. Are there any questions about software compliance testing or recertification?
Laurel, this is Clay. Maybe what we could do that would be helpful is on each of these calls, perhaps keep a running list of those who still need to set appointments, those who are currently working on it, and those who have, we won't have to list those that are completed, but maybe just to make sure we have kind of a burn down list that we can share on a regular basis, I think would be helpful.
Okay. Okay, yeah, we can prepare a list for the next call of sort of everyone's progress check-in. And I just want to add that I did not list the vendors who recertified for California last year. If you fall into that category, please just go to the website and check when your recertification date was so that you know when you need to complete it to be ready to go for the next year. All right, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Julianne. If anyone has any questions, feel free to send me an email.
Thanks, Laurel. Would you throw your email up in the chat box? Our next session, or our next section, is with Josh. Josh, are you ready for ET3 discussion?
Yes, I am. I'm going to go ahead and share my screens. Give me just a second here. Okay, that should be working. Good morning, everyone. Wanted to give you an update on some work with ET3. As a reminder, this is the CMS pilot project that's being done to potentially change some reimbursement models for EMS. We have been meeting with the ET3 team on a weekly basis and oftentimes several times a week to help them develop the project and do it in such a way that it will be able to utilize NEMSIS data from EMS agencies with as little tweaking as possible. And then we have a call about once a month with a stakeholder group that includes some of you, where we can reach out for feedback from software developers and state data managers and agencies and get their input on the things that are being developed. So we want to take a few minutes to update all of you on today's call on current progress with the development of the ET3 project. ET3 Go Live will be later this fall. And right now, the work is in preparing their system to receive NEMSIS data from their participating agencies, and also to develop the resources that software vendors will need to properly configure their software products to send data on behalf of their customers who participate in ET3. So to this point, we have published a state data set for ET3. Wanted to show that to you. It's in the NEMSIS states repository. So one of the states, let me go up a level here. This is the states repository that lists all of the states. One of those states is called the ET3 project. And within the ET3 project, the resources folder contains their state data set file. There's the XML formatted file, which can be used for automated consumption. And we've also pre-built a PDF printout of that file. I'm just gonna bring up the PDF for a second here. So this is their state data set, and it contains two components so far. It has two custom data elements, and it has their list of quote unquote state collected elements, the elements that ET3 will be collecting from software products from their agencies that are participating. So we're gonna go through the custom data elements, the two of them, and then we're gonna do a little bit of a review of what's on the list of custom elements, but you can grab the resource from the repository here. Okay, so the data elements that ET3 will be collecting. They have decided to collect all of the NEMSIS mandatory elements that in the EMS data set portion of the standard. The reason for that is so that they don't have to do a custom XSD, and you on your side don't have to implement a custom XSD. So you'll export all of the mandatory elements. They have identified 90 required elements to collect. They've identified 15 elements that are tagged as recommended in the data dictionary that they'll need to collect, and 19 elements that are tagged as optional in the data dictionary. I've displayed a breakdown here by section. You'll see, for example, in ERS, they're just collecting the one mandatory element, which is whether or not there was cardiac arrest. They're not collecting any of the other cardiac arrest or resuscitation elements. And so you'll see that in a couple spots. Same thing with protocols, just that one mandatory element, or well, sorry, that's a required element for which protocols were used. So there's a bit of a breakdown of where the elements are. Want to just give you a heads up on the ones that are tagged as recommended or optional in the NEMSIS data dictionary. This is the list of data elements that are tagged as recommended in the data dictionary that ET3 will be collecting. You'll see these patient-related elements that have to do with patient demographics. That's important to them for linking the EMS records with the billing data that comes in from the EMS agencies and other data that they'll be linking with. The incident location, they're getting you know, street address, city, etc. Advanced directives, a few additional vital signs, and the destination or transferred to name or code. The blue bars here indicate how many states are collecting these data elements out of a total of 40 states that have published a state data set. So you'll see that most of these elements are being collected by a large percentage of our states, and so we're not really foreseeing any additional burden in most cases to collect these data elements. Next are the optional elements, the ones tagged as optional in the data dictionary.
Okay, I'm on a national EMS call right now.
We have someone who's unmuted. You can check your mic. And so here you can see this list. More patient demographic stuff, social security number is one you might want to pay attention to, driver's license. Again, those are for linkage of data, for the linkage to billing and other data. And you can look through the others here. You'll see several outcome elements. These are listed as optional in NEMSIS 3.4, but that they are required in NEMSIS 3.5. And so ET3 is going to be collecting these elements kind of with that eye to the future as we look at 3.5. So they understand that these elements may be blank a lot of the time, but they will become more populated as we move to 3.5. Any questions or feedback on these elements that ET3 is going to collect? Again, I've not shown you the required and mandatory elements that they're collecting. I just wanted to highlight the recommended and optionals that they're collecting, because those are the ones that may represent an additional burden to agencies. Any comments or questions?
Hey, this is Amber. I just have a quick question. Is the expectation that we're to build all of the sort of alternative transport destinations into our facility list, or will like a other sort of broader category suffice?
That's a great question. If I could, I'm going to actually postpone that till we look at the destination type custom element. Let's discuss that, because that's one of the topics that we've brought up with ET3 that we want to make sure it gets discussed. So thanks for bringing that question up. Anything else on the elements being collected?
Josh, have we addressed the elements that have not been listed here, that are not optional, required, or mandatory? Do they need to be stripped from the file?
Oh, yeah. Oh, Clay, help me out. I believe that the ET3 team has decided that they will go ahead and accept data that contains the elements that they're not interested in, and then they'll just strip those from the file as they process it. Is that, does that sound right, or do we need to confirm that with the ET3 team?
That sounds right, Josh. John's on the call with us, and he'll be sharing some things in just a moment. Maybe John, if we're missing the mark, but I think that's right. I think it's just going to be stripped out.
Okay.
Hi, Clay. This is Neil Milan. I'm with the ET3 team. I think while we're on that topic, I'll just quickly answer that. When John Beckett goes through the diagram, you'll see that the way our systems are operating is there's a couple data warehousing steps, and we'll strip out that information once we receive the entirety of the PCR, strip out the information that we're not collecting, and then work with the list that we have from there. So again, we're trying to do this to minimize some of the tweaking and burden on the participants to have to strip it out themselves. We'll do it on that end. It's in our systems, but it also falls in the area of we're not seeing it or doing any analysis with it until we agree with participants that we are. So it's a way to get what we need with minimizing burden. So we'll happy to revisit that again when John goes through the data flow diagram.
Thanks, Neil. And someone asked, is there a method for agencies to acquire the e-outcome information? Yeah, there is a separate project we're working on that will be going through this fall and even into early next year to try to make some forward progress in the industry with regards to EMS agencies getting outcome data from hospitals. Okay. Great. Okay, let's look at the custom data elements. They have two custom data elements. Before we jump into them, I want to just do kind of a review of the types of dispositions that ET3 will cover. Number one, they'll cover transport of an individual to a hospital emergency department or other destination covered under the regulations. In other words, business as usual. EMS agencies will still get paid for those transports. The second one is an alternative, where EMS transports to an alternative destination partner, like a primary care doctor's office or urgent care clinic, rather than going to the hospital. And so for that particular disposition, we need to use e-disposition.12, treated and transported by this EMS unit. That's easy. And then in e-disposition.21, that's the type of destination. It will use existing values for a type of destination, places that that states may have already considered having in their facility list, but it will introduce some new custom values for type of destination, places that maybe states haven't included in their facility lists up to this point. And the third scenario is a treatment in place disposition, where they bring a qualified healthcare partner to the scene who is non-EMS, or they bring that healthcare partner via telehealth to the patient. We are going to need new custom values for e-disposition.12 to indicate this sort of disposition, where they treated the patient and they transferred that patient to a non-EMS provider while on scene and did not transport. And new custom value for e-disposition 21 to indicate the type of destination / transferred to. Okay, so those are the three scenarios, and let's look at how they'll play out in these custom elements. For e-disposition.21, it's fairly straightforward. In NEMSIS 3.4, they are going to add 2 custom codes that are actually standard codes in 3.5, mental health facility and drug and or alcohol rehabilitation facility. So those, they'll be asking agencies to add those two to their 3.4 data. Those will both, all of these custom values will just map back to other in 3.4 for their standard mapping. Okay, the 3 new types of destinations that will be added both to 3.4 and to 3.5 as custom elements are a federally qualified health center, a qualified healthcare partner, and a rural health clinic. All of these are defined terms in CMS, so they're not generic things. You know, the fact that a health clinic is in a rural area is not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is that they've received a specific designation from CMS that's called rural health clinic. And same thing with the other 2. So those will be the new types of destinations. Excuse me. So Amber, coming back to your question, what we are anticipating here is that we know that states have published lists of facilities and that many states validate incoming data and they look at the destination / transferred to code to make sure that it's a code that represents a facility that the state has listed in their state data set. These ET3 agencies could be transporting or transferring patients to facilities that states may not have typically listed in their state data set facility lists. And that is a potential issue for when they go ahead and send the data to the state and try to indicate that facility to which they transported or transferred care. And any thoughts, Amber, or others from the states on the potential impact there?
I mean, the thought, this is Amber, sorry, in Colorado, is just, it would be a pretty heavy lift to maintain all of these facilities. So just some sort of like generic code would be fine if we could just use any federally qualified health center, and that's the code that they use instead of their specific, like we use their license numbers. It would just be hard for us to maintain, not saying it's impossible, just not necessarily the way we do things now.
Okay, so you would opt for maybe adding just 3 entries to your state facility list that would be quote unquote generics. So you'd have a destination code that represents, generically represents a federally qualified healthcare center, for example.
Yeah, exactly. And even that we'd have to provide some communication to our agencies about what an FQHC is versus a qualified healthcare center and rural health clinic. You know, those aren't terms regularly thrown around in EMS. So I'm just trying to, you know, wrap my head around how we'd go about doing that.
Yeah. Great. Just as a heads up, we are going to be sharing this particular question on the next NEMSIS Data Managers Council call so that we can get good, you know, broad input from all the data managers.
This is Anne in Arizona. Kind of unrelated to this, but how I think we'd end up doing some of this is we already have generic destination code, destination names for certain types of facilities. If the agency doesn't, if the agency requests we add a particular mental health facility or a particular skilled nursing facility, we will add it for them with the licensing code. Like Amber was saying, we use those 2 when we specify. But we also have a generic one like unspecified nursing home, and then they would use that destination type and they could use a generic code, and then they can put in whatever name they want, which would help us if we want to look at it later. That's how we've handled it in general with things. But I also totally agree with Amber. I don't know if I can easily think about federal qualified healthcare center, qualified healthcare partner. And it reminds me of when we look at like traffic data in our trauma registry, and there's street or highway versus non-traffic. Nobody can easily pick that out unless they're a registrar, and even then I have to sit there and think about what that means. I think that might be problematic.
Yeah, and Anne, are you thinking then you would have to go into each, well, do you do this already where you put your facilities and you map them to this type of destination for your agencies? So then would we have to do that for each one of the facilities?
I mean, our generic ones, we ask them to put in, you know, whatever destination type it truly is, and we use some of the custom ones that ImageTrend has. And then for those that aren't, the only ones that I flag are if they put in a generic unspecified acute care facility, like that's a destination type, or they use that generic destination. We do have a generic destination name that says unspecified acute care. I send myself a report and I review it and make sure it's like an out-of-state facility that we just don't have listed, or one that we're waiting to add to our schematron. I don't know if that answers your question. So because we also, I mean, I looked at trying to maintain an entire list of every possible licensed facility for every type of licensing that would be a healthcare, you know, from, we can't do all the physicians' offices and the, you know, we have most of the urgent cares in there, but it's a big, it's hard to maintain it properly.
Yeah.
This is Mark from California. I think that we would still want to go ahead and add all the facilities into our list. We just ask that people give us a little bit of lead time, and we'll get them all added in.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, and I'll just add that the EMS agencies that participate in the ET3 project, they will be working with these types of places that I've listed here and others when they initially set up their participation in the project. So they will know exactly who they have contracted with or agreed with to pull those organizations into their EMS calls through telehealth or on-scene transfer. In other words, they'll have those specific agreements in place with a specific clinic that happens to be a federally qualified health center, or that happens to be a rural health clinic. So the agency at that level should know exactly who they are participating with in the project and what designation that participant has in order to be eligible for this ET3 reimbursement.
That's helpful to know. This is Amber again. And Josh, can you remind me, when we work on the facility list, I seem to remember there's a way that we can connect sort of the facility name to this type of destination, correct? So we could theoretically put in all of the facilities that will be included in, you know, the ET3 model, and then we can sort of connect it to whether it's a FQHC or not at the state level, so our agencies don't have to do that. Is that true?
That could be. Neil, I don't know, that might be a bit of a question for you. As the agencies set up their participation in ET3, you know, they'll work with these other organizations to kind of have their agreements in place. And, but I suppose at the state level, a state could go ahead and just get a list of all the FQHCs that exist in their state. Is that right?
You know, that's a good question. I think if I understood it correctly, I assume that the states have lists of the different facilities that fall under these federal designations. I believe there's also national lists available, but the states, I would assume, have them already since they're pretty well monitored. The other thing I would say to maybe answer this question is when John gets through the flow diagram, when we get to the portion about the CMS systems, I think we can revisit the idea of matching in some of the claims payment information, because I think that will maybe address some of the potential gaps that there might be in these facilities, because we do have a way to merge some of this. And I think it'll be a good time to revisit this question then when it comes to matching with what we already have when participants have already determined their partners for these interventions.
Yeah, and you're right. We do have the facilities listed. We just license them under different names at the state level. So when I'm adding a facility, I'm looking at my state license information. And so we don't call them rural health clinics. We'll call them something else. And our FQHCs are FQHCs, but also we might license them under a different name. So it's a little bit trickier to parse out the differences between these. So that's where I'm just trying to get at. I think it's an impossible task to expect my EMS agencies to be able to know the difference between these three types of facilities. So if it was something that they didn't have to fill out that we could do for them and work with CMS or you know, other folks at the federal level, that would be greatly beneficial.
Yeah, thanks for raising this possibility. And I think Josh, Clay, and you know, other members of the TAC will probably work with you to kind of determine what are some potential gaps that we have here. But we think we can address a lot of these and really decrease the burden on the EMS agencies with what we have matched from information that participants have for determining partners. So I think we'll be able to address some of it, but we would like the data as clean as possible. We also understand if there's just, it's not really feasible, we'll do what we can. So definitely looking forward to discussing this again when we get to that part of the flow diagram.
And this is Ann again from Arizona. I just have kind of one more thought or question. And it's sometimes just because I haven't understood the topic thoroughly, but we already have our destination type listed, like I said, for anything that we specified as a specific healthcare center that isn't just one of the generic ones we allow agencies to use. And so we kind of use that to determine, is this an urgent care, is this a clinic, like on our own end. I believe type of destination is a single select. You can't have multiple values associated with it. And so that might be a problem if we've already kind of said, we want these all to be listed as urgent cares. And we use our data, we're able to separate it out, but then we need to change it to one of these. I'm not sure if there'd be a way for us to keep both.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is Frank with R1. I had the same question along the same lines. That this element is traditionally a type of physical place. So a qualified healthcare partner could also be several different types of physical places. And it's a single recurrence field. Is there any attempt or another place that this data might be captured better, like a sort of what kind of partner was utilized for this encounter?
We could take that back for discussion. It would probably have to go as a custom element, like a standalone custom element to go that route.
Yeah, I mean, I know these are often tied into facility databases at each vendor and each billing platform, and so I think this introduces a lot of complexity for the billing process as well, and for medics selecting the proper type of place.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Oh, we got someone's audio cutting out. Yeah, if your audio connection comes back, we'll be happy to field the question.
Hey, Josh, this is
yes.
Julianne. There are a couple of questions in the chat.
Yeah, I've been kind of seeing those. I think they're going to be answered as we move forward.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, so we'll get to the web services piece, and I think that'll cover those. Okay, so great. Thanks for the feedback so far here. As I said, we're going to discuss this in depth with the data managers in their next NEMSIS DMC call. So that'll be a great time to dig a little deeper into the issues that were brought up today on type of destination. Let's also look at disposition. This was the one I thought would be messier of the two, but it turns out today it's not. Maybe, we'll see. The ET3 team plans to add 2 custom dispositions. The first one is treated and transferred care to another provider on scene, non-EMS, and patient treated and transferred care to a telehealth provider. So in both cases, these are covering that treatment in place scenario where they did not transport the patient, but they did turn the care of that patient over to someone else who was not an EMS provider. And so ET3 needs to know that for those alternative billing options. Now, our challenge was to figure out what standard NEMSIS code this maps back to for, you know, what actually goes in edisposition.12 in order to make a valid export. And we ended up selecting patient treated and transferred care to another EMS unit as the fallback value. The compromise here is that clearly we are not transferring to another EMS unit. But all of the other dispositions that we could have picked would have ended up indicating either that EMS transported or that EMS released the patient, and neither of those is the case. They did transfer care. So this kind of got two of the three you know, salient points of these alternative dispositions. The idea here is, since it falls back to treated and transferred care to another EMS unit, then it would be seen as a non-transport. So software with data entry logic would be hiding the questions that ask about how they transported and stuff like that. They would still show the questions indicating who they transferred to, and also ask for the date and time that they transferred care on scene, as opposed to asking for a date and time that they did a destination patient transfer of care. So that's what they're looking at for the two custom dispositions. And I think there was a question in the chat that was related to disposition stuff. So let me check, make sure we covered that. Anne asked if there will be a disposition that specifies a referral. No, ET3 is not reimbursing EMS agencies for referrals. They are reimbursing them for transferring the care of the patient either to an alternative destination or a telehealth or on-scene provider. Anything on this custom element? Okay, so the things you'll want to take back and think about is, how does this affect data entry logic in your software, and data validation. Of course, data validation rules in Schematron files that key off of this disposition of treated and transferred care to another EMS unit, those rules are going to trigger on these calls. And then down in the custom results is where we will see the actual code, the custom code for that disposition. But that standard code will trigger validation rules. And so we wanted to be careful about that. Okay. Just real quickly, we're working on a Schematron schema for ET3. So the idea here is that for agencies that participate in ET3, when they send data to their state, they're going to go through XSD, national Schematron, and state Schematron validation. When they send data to CMS, they're going to go through XSD, national Schematron, and ET3 Schematron validation instead of state Schematron validation. That means at the point of data entry, they're really going to be having to make sure that they've satisfied the rules of both the state and ET3 in addition to the national rules. And so we're going to try to be very careful that the ET3 rules do not conflict with rules that states may have published. We don't want to get agencies into a scenario where they cannot satisfy both the state rules and the ET3 rules at the same time. So we're still working on that, on finalizing kind of the business requirements for what those rules will be, and then we'll put together a Schematron schema for public comment and review. Okay, I think at this point I can introduce John Beckett and turn the time over to him. He's going to talk about the data submission process, and I think as he does so, that'll answer some of the questions that came up in the chat about data submission. So John, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Josh. Hey, Julianne, I think that I need to be able to get permission to share my screen. It gives me an error message when I try to do this.
Yep, we will fix that right. Oh, just as we were speaking, you should be able to, let's see. Chris, would you co-host John Beckett?
Yes. John Beckett, got it. Sorry for the delay. There you go. Try again.
Great, John. We see your screen.
All right, great. Okay, so I'm just gonna, with the interest of time, go through the diagram here as quickly as possible. And I know there were some topics of interest that may come up during the process, so feel free to comment. On the left side of the diagram, just to give everyone orientation, is pretty much all the things that are occurring from a data perspective, data flow perspective. And what we tried to do with this diagram is just really give some context around how much data is flowing, as well as where is that data coming from. Obviously there is some interest in terms of where that data is going. So the left side is happening outside of CMS. The right side is things that I'll discuss that are going on within the CMS enclave. Just real quick, I'll also bring up a focus here. So instead of seeing the big diagram, I just kind of zoomed in on the left hand side of the diagram. And everything starts, I'm going to try and use my arrow if you can see it here. Everything starts here with the ET3 participant agencies. And what has to happen with them, as you probably already know, is as depicted with 1A flow, we need to get some data or information from these applicants before they are accepted into the ET3 model program. So that's what this data here that flows in, and it goes into a process by where that information is evaluated by the model team, and ultimately, if successful, as depicted with the handshake here, the approval is given, and that individual, or excuse me, that company entity is provided a participant agreement. And in there are all the terms and conditions of being a part of the ET3 model. So 1A, 1B is really the flow of that information. And as you can see here, I also, at the bottom of that, put in that as a prerequisite of exchanging anything else in terms of security keys or anything that's allowing for the flow of data, onboarding is a process that takes place immediately after we get a fully executed participant agreement. So there is a dependency here between these two, and we want to obviously get folks, once the participant agreement is fully executed, we want to get them onboarded, tested, trained, as well as security keys issued. So that's a very important step that we want to take. So getting back to the flow, so that's all application data. I do want to point out that the data ends up in a repository within CMS. And likewise, we have some other data. If you look over here to the right side, 1C, that the NEMSIS folks are providing us. So once we have a full list of agencies that we know are going to be a part of the program, then we can get from the NEMSIS database information from a demographic standpoint. So we use that data, again, to do some checks and balances, if you will, and to kind of set up our tables so that the data that's flowing in is data we're expecting from these agencies. I'm going to go back up to 3 now, and with 3 here, basically now we're all set up and ready to submit. And there is a couple of flows here that we wanted to, document, because we came into it with an understanding that not only do you have participant agencies, but you have vendors that are contracted with them to provide that data submission support. So we wanted to make sure that they're also put on the page here. And ultimately, between the two of them, there's going to be a submission of patient care reports. So that's what flow 3C here is representing. I also wanted to make sure that we had on the screen here the things that are normally taking place if ET3 wasn't around, such as PCR data that's flowing to the states. So that's going to continue, and as Josh mentioned, there is a schematron that is still going to be used to validate that data. And a subset of that data will then flow down to the NEMSIS national database. So those flows are still for going to take place. And in addition to that, we'll be looking at doing the ET3 submission. So I'm going to come back up here, and again, we're on the left side of the diagram. I'm just going to zoom in. With the patient care data, the patient care report data that's coming in, there's 3 levels of validation that we're looking to do. So you're familiar with the XSD validation that takes place. And as you can see, at any point of the validation, there could be failure that occurs. So I wanted to just point that out with the arrows in the different flows of 5A, 5B, and 5C. But in the order, the SXD is the first validation, then comes the national schematron validation, and then the ET3 schematron validation. And those validations, again, should be unique to the data elements that's being validated. So if we do have a failure, let's say with the national schematron, the failure on the ET3 schematron is going to be of different data elements that we're responsible for validating. Ultimately, 5D represents a success of passing those tests, and the flow of data can then go over to CMS. And at that point, we are using a WSDL API approach to send that data. So again, CMS is developing some things on their side so that when that data comes through, it can be received. And there is a level of validation that will occur on the side of the CMS as well. That's very similar to what was validated by the ET3 schematron. So that validation is going to be shared. All right, I'm going to kind of continue here and go to the next side of the diagram, which is the CMS side. And I'm just going to give a little bit of context. We've got a system that is on CMS we call CDX. It's the Central Data Exchange. And that is where that API data is going to flow into. As a matter of fact, that's where all the data that I've mentioned up until now, application data, participant demographic data, and PCR data will all flow into the Central Data Exchange. And there is a box up here, as you see, that gives the indication that the same validations that we did on the vendor side for data that is being submitted is going to happen also on the CDX side. So we want to make sure that, again, validation is very robust as possible. Looking at the flows, we wanted to also represent, or at least make sure you understood that that data that comes into CDX is not just going to sit there and will be the data that's used. And as Neil pointed out earlier, that's where the filtering comes into play in terms of once it comes into CDX, then whatever data ET3 is interested in will then be filtered, and that will be stored in a smaller database that will ultimately be transferred to a database where a lot of the operational processing will take place. So the arrows you see here for 7A that go between CDX and something we call the RF operational data store, that is where that data will all flow into, and processing of that data will take place. I did want to point out that if you notice on the flow number 8 here, there's a level of partner vetting and vetting that takes place that we're using some of the processes and data that's a part of the CMS program integrity systems that are there. So that is being leveraged so that, again, we can accomplish the vetting that we need to. Continuing on here, I'm going to kind of go over to 7C. 7C here is an important flow because we also want data to be stored as well as flowed down to a reporting system. And it does a little more than just reporting. We want to do some patient matching. We understand some of the data coming in may not be as clean because for whatever reason, it wasn't captured when the incident occurred. So there is a level of patient matching that we want to do so that we can, if that same particular patient may have had a different incident, we can match those records up. We have something called a master patient ID, which can track patients' records that are of the same individual. And again, this environment is very important for us to start the process of analytics and doing analysis on the data. So that data, again, and we can do some reporting there coming directly from CDX. And then I also want to point out with flow number 9 here, we also, after the data is processed off of the RF operational data store, that data is also transferred to the EDFR environment, again, for the purpose of reporting and any additional matching that needs to take place. Finally, with flow number 10 here, there is a level of monitoring and reporting, evaluation reporting. So I'm going to just show you the boxes at the bottom here. So we have measures that we've come up with. And again, those measures in some cases rely on data from claims as well as PCR data. We also have a learning domain, if you will, that is going to use some of this data. And then ultimately, there's a need to do some model evaluation. And so again, those boxes right now, we are developing what data is being used and just what we're going to be looking at from a reporting standpoint. So there's not yet a full, I would say, understanding yet of how this is going to actually be implemented. But we are working on that right now. Okay, I'm just going to just stop there, again, in the interest of time, and I'll just kind of turn this back over to you, Josh.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, John. One of the takeaways from what John shared here is that CMS is attempting to implement the NEMSIS standard web services submission process so that there's as little variation as possible when an agency sends data to CMS compared to sending data to their state. The other takeaway is that this data will be coming directly from agencies' software products to CMS. Now, if you're a state data manager and you have an agency in your state that's going to participate in ET3, and that agency directly uses your state system as their agency software, then keep that in mind, that your state system then is going to need to be able to send data to ET3 for that participating agency. In lots of cases, I think agencies may be using their own software at the local level, and they'll be having these two data flows going out, one to the state and one to ET3. They probably have other data flows in place already, like sending data to CARES or sending data off to a billing system. So this would be an additional data flow. Okay, a couple things I wanted to run by all of you in terms of the web services and what that's going to look like. So I'm going to go ahead and get my screen sharing back on here.
Hey Josh, while you're getting that set up, Ann just had a question for John on whether or not that diagram would be available for our stakeholders.
So I think Neil, why don't you answer that for us? I'm pretty sure that it may be okay, right, to share some of this with the folks.
Right. So we're going to have so part of the diagram is still a work in progress. That's part of why we haven't greatly distributed it, as you saw some of the CMS enclave sites. Yeah. For all the participant agencies, we intend to have this out closer to the fall go live. But what we can do is we can work out kind of a stripped down version of it that doesn't show as much of the pertinent CMS enclave. There's some security policies we have to keep in mind, but we'll be able to share that through NEMSIS, and we'll work with Clay and Josh to make sure you have the pertinent info that you need while we get some clearance that involves the other pieces of the model policy and security concerns. So we will share it. I think you'll have one through the NEMSIS and to the TAC. And then when we do go go live or get closer to the model go live, we'll have the fully fleshed out one available for all of our participating agencies.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you, John.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so a couple questions related to web services. CMS is going to implement the NEMSIS web service for submitting this EMS data. However, there are a couple potential deviations that we wanted to run by you and get feedback on. The first one is when you do a submit data request, they are not going to be using the username, password, and organization elements for authentication. Those could still be present in the submission, they'll just be ignored, but they will be using an API key HTTP header. So you'll go through a process to receive an API key from CMS. And then when you do these data submissions, you would need to include that API key in the header of the SOAP request. Is that going to be doable for the vendors? Is that going to represent a significant burden to accommodate that?
Yeah, this is Dan from Ishra, and that's unfortunately definitely a code change. Would be a code change for us. It'd be really nice if they could just use the NEMSIS standard for authentication as well, I guess would be my 2 cents.
Okay. John Becker from Documed asked why not in an HTTP header? I think that's exactly what they're proposing, is it would be in an HTTP header. Any other comments from vendors on this one?
Is there some reason we can't keep it the same as the NEMSIS authentication?
We talked with them a little bit about that just yesterday, that their API key could be in one of these data elements here. It just means they've got to actually, they have to parse into the SOAP, XML SOAP message to grab it, as opposed to just grabbing it from the HTTP header and authenticating before they parse any data. I think that's the difference on the CMS side, but yeah, it's important for us to see, you know, is it better for them to do more work on their side to parse it out of here? Or is it easy enough to where vendors can accommodate it in the header?
All right. Yeah, this is John Burkhardt from R1. It's going to be a code change for us too.
Okay.
Yeah, we have to customize it, but there's been many web services, especially in the V2 days, that use that kind of authentication. So it's not like it's, you know, foreign to us. But to your question, if the work could be done once instead of 100 times, I think it's overall better. But if there's a reason that they can't do it, then yeah, I think we'll all be on board for it, whoever needs to be submitting.
Yeah, it's a code change for safety as well.
Okay.
Code change for Medusa sign.
Okay. Okay, thank you for the feedback on that. So we'll have some further discussions on it. And MacroLogic said the same thing in the chat. Okay, the other thing to get feedback on is when you do a submit data request, CMS is going to receive that data and they're going to do a synchronous response. So in other words, they're going to give you the validation and processing results in their response to your submit data request. So they're not going to return like a 0 status and have you come back later through a retrieve status operation. They'll just return the results as part of the initial submission. So the question then is, if CMS does not implement the retrieve status call at all, so in other words, you get the outcome of the data processing and validation in response to your submit data request, and then you have no way to re-request that status information. You don't have the ability to follow up with a retrieve status call later. Would that be an issue looking at how you've implemented your systems. What I have in my mind here is there may be systems that have just automatically implemented a process where they do a submit data and they don't even look at the results of the submit data. They just follow it up a few minutes later with a retrieve status and then keep submitting a retrieve status until they get a final status. For systems coded like that, this would obviously be an issue because they'd have to start looking at the response that they get from the submit data request. But any input on that question?
What's going to happen if their systems are slow or lagging? Are we going to wait longer than TLS can hold a connection to get a response?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. Good question.
Yes, if we get this is John from R1, if we get a successful response the first time, it won't be a problem for us.
Okay, so the issue would come up if you had a timeout or something.
Sure.
Yeah, same for Beyond Lucid and MetaView. It'll take the first status. We've seen places where we get a ticket number, and then when we go to query retrieve status, it always returns. We have no idea what that ticket number is. If that might be a quick implementation.
Okay. Oh, right. That they could just stub in a kind of a hard-coded retrieve status.
Right.
Okay. So other than the timeouts consideration, are there any software products that are just kind of automatically submitting retrieve status requests and aren't really looking at the initial response that they got from the submit data request? Okay, we'll take that as a no then. So the main consideration here we'll talk about with the ET3 team is what happens if their system gets bogged down or if we're seeing connection timeouts. Then we get in a situation where you really don't know if they successfully processed your submission or not. Okay, great. That kind of wraps it up. I want to just, someone asked where to get the resources. So just as a reminder on that, the state data set for ET3 is published in the state projects portion in the NEMSIS Git repositories. It is also visible through the custom element library. So just a quick reminder there. The project repositories were in the NEMSIS states project, and ET3 is one of the projects in there. And then for the custom element library, you'll see ET3 listed next to national custom elements down here at the bottom of that custom element library. Click on that one, you'll see there are two custom elements that they've published there. Okay, Julianne, that was a pretty meaty part of the agenda, but I think we're finally ready to move on to the next one.
Okay, it was. Thank you for John Beckett and Neil Milan for being on the call with us today to answer those ET3 questions. I'm going to pull up the agenda. Josh, there was one other ET3 issue at the very bottom that we may want to catch. Let's see, it's this one right here. Is that one that you've already addressed, or do you want to catch that one while we're still on the ET3 topic?
Yeah, let's catch that one now. ET3 is going to ask model participants to submit, I think, like a year of past data so that they can have some baseline for benchmarking what things looked like in the agency prior to their ET3 participation compared to while they were participating in ET3. So there will be a time where vendors are going to be asked by their agencies to go ahead and do a big submission of all their past year of data over to CMS. The ET3 team was just interested in knowing if there's going to be any issues with PCRs having been archived or somehow harder to get to based on how long ago they were created. My initial thought was that if they're asking for the past year of data, I would anticipate that's all still going to be available in live, quote unquote, hot systems, easy to export, that we probably wouldn't be bumping into archive issues until we get, like maybe 3 to 7 years back into history. But we want to bring that up for your response and see if you have any input on that question. Like, are there going to be any issues here where your systems tend to sort of archive data and it gets harder for you to re-export that data because it was collected more than a certain amount of time ago?
Only past the HIPAA date, I think it's 8 years.
Okay.
Hey, Josh. I don't think archiving is as big of a problem as systems that may have captured the data in either V2 format or a 334 format, or, and I think a consideration must be made that when they process these PCRs, they can't really do a lot of validation or enforcement on them outside of the NEMSIS national standard.
Yeah, good point. They can't really apply validation rules that didn't exist at the time that the record was created. Okay, great. Back to you, Julianne.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks for catching that last topic as well. Clay, I think you're next.
All right. All right. Thank you. So far, lots of great information. This has been incredibly helpful. Clearly, we're not going to get through the entire agenda, but that's okay. This has been very important to have this opportunity to share this information. And also thank you to the CMS ET3 folks who joined us for that section of this call. Incredibly helpful to have you on the call. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move us into the next topic, and I would perhaps just ask Eric to maybe queue up a little bit. It'll be valuable to talk about, for example, rollout time associated with this topic we're going to cover now, that is specifically the EMS COVID resource reporting tools. We want to update you on where we are with this and let you know the tools and the training materials that will be available. We won't go into great detail in regards to like working through the training components or going through every attribute of this. We plan to present this in greater detail on the DMC call that's coming up next week for the states. So this will be educational for them, but also we want to make sure that the vendors have an opportunity to understand how this is put together. I think Eric is really interested in a wide distribution of folks understanding this tool and using it. So I think the vendors' help with that will be incredibly valuable. So I'll just add a little bit of history and then maybe have Eric talk to a little bit about the rollout and how this will be used might be valuable. So you may remember, I don't know, perhaps 6 weeks ago now, we talked about the idea of the Office of EMS at NHTSA wanting to collect some additional information regarding COVID exposures within our EMS agencies and also their level of on-hand PPE. We talked about including that in the NEMSIS standard, but actually came up with the idea that it needs to be an independent, freestanding program and process. So that's now in place. We're very close to kind of rolling this out. Eric, do you want to take just a minute maybe and talk about what you plan for the rollout and when that will occur?
Sure, it's actually started. I've been sending out information this morning, and Catherine Elkins, I'm sorry, who works in our office, is the deputy lead for the Healthcare Resilience Task Force within the COVID HHS response. And she works with Dr. Kramer on that task force. There are multiple working groups and subgroups underneath of them that are doing everything from resource distribution to data collection. We have done 2 demos for various work groups. We have multiple demos scheduled over the next 2 weeks. We just got asked to do one for the SEMSO leadership tomorrow afternoon. So we are working through our standard list of national organizations with the request that this be disseminated to the state and then local agencies as much as possible for widest dissemination possible, as Clay said. So the actual Healthcare Resilience Task Force and leadership within HHS and FEMA are getting this through the FEMA regions and then into the FEMA state level and then for distribution through the local level. So I guess in some theory, it's a bit of a test of that system, because if data flows up the way it's supposed to, it should flow down the way it's supposed to. But we'll see how that goes. This tool has been developed to fill that void of reporting for EMS services, and that's fire-based, for-profit, any type of emergency services that's being delivered where PPE products are being used to report into the system. We realize that to get every agency in the United States is highly unlikely. However, we feel that if we market this and we continue to push the product, let people know that it's out there and this is their voice to give a report to the state and federal levels, I think it'll help sell itself at some point. I think as services become more in need of PPE and resources, they're probably more likely to report. So with that, please, Clay, go ahead.
All right, thank you. I appreciate that very much. And so I'm just going to familiarize you with where the tool will be, what it potentially looks like, where the training materials will be, and then maybe we can talk with the vendors a little bit about how they think they might be able to disseminate this and make it available. So I'm showing you where it's currently listed right now. I would suggest perhaps that you not be kind of advertising its presence until you see some resource materials come out from the NEMSIS TAC. That'll probably be today or tomorrow for sure. So we're very close to rollout. So I'm just on the opening page of the NEMSIS website. You'll see there's a new kind of URL right on the opening page that says EMS COVID Resource Reporting Tool. This is where you might, for example, have find the URL where you might ask your agencies to go to complete this. It provides an introduction page, talks about why this is important to the agencies, what's the benefit to them, and then there's also a link to the actual tool. And this is where some of the training materials will also be made available. I'm going to go ahead to the training tool and just show you briefly what this will look like when they go in case you as vendors receive questions. There's basically 4 sections, one that identifies your agency and really a contact for that agency, both by name and by phone number. There's a section, and I'll just mention that the idea of the Office of EMS and NHTSA is that this is completed every week, right? So maybe Monday morning, this is completed by the agencies because the elements relate to kind of a weekly process of review. So here you'll see a section talking about COVID, and in the past 7 days, do you have new confirmed cases, new suspected cases? Have there been any deaths associated with COVID? I'll make note that we ask the agencies to indicate the number of their EMS personnel. We do that because we want to determine the acuteness of the stress caused by COVID. And so we develop a percentage based on these values here as numerators, and this value up here is a denominator to determine what percentage of their active workforce is affected. And we'll talk about that in relationship to the dashboard in just a minute. We also ask questions about whether there's a personnel shortage today or within this week. And then there's this section that just goes through the forms of PPE that the Office of EMS is interested in kind of tracking on-hand supply. And there's a number of sub-questions related to these, right? So if I ask, for example, I indicated for N95 mats, I only have, 3 to 5 days of inventory. Then it'll ask if you're implementing an extended use policy or a reuse policy. If yes, can you obtain this through a normal purchasing procedure? A yes or no, it'll still ask if you've If you've made a request through emergency management or some other process, if you say yes, it will ask you whether your most current request has been completely or partially completed or no. The system is smart, right? So if I answered no here, then you wouldn't see that earlier question. So it's built to be efficient and really only take about 3 to 5 minutes to complete. What will happen for the states is that this data will be aggregated into a Tableau dashboard on Tuesday mornings and on Thursday mornings. And it will look something like this. And so this is test data right now, but it will look something like this. And the states and at the national level will have an ability to look at all 3 of the major areas, right? So PPE availability, COVID exposure, or personnel shortage. It's dynamic, so the state will be able to quickly go in and see who is in acute stress or need within their state, who's at minimal stress or need levels, and who is really experiencing no stress right now. So the value for the federal level, right, is they can immediately go in and say, okay, so who's in acute stress for N95 masks? And for the entire country, it will show those people, those agencies, the people that they can contact, and then their phone number. The states will have that same ability, so they can immediately determine who, for example, needs more masks or is experiencing a personnel shortage or has high levels of COVID exposure. How acute stress versus minimal stress is defined. We'll have a user's guide associated with this, and it will walk through this. So for example, for PPE availability, acute stress or need is any of the PPE items marked as 0 to a 1, or excuse me, 0 to a 3-day supply. Then gold or yellow is 4 to 14, and green is greater than a 15-day supply. So you'll have a good understanding of why someone is listed as acute versus minimal versus no stress. So we'll provide that out. So that's a quick overview of the 2 major components of this process of getting this data to the state level and also to the federal level. Julianne, do you want to take just a moment perhaps and just show a couple of the quick promotional projects that will have been made available, just so folks can get a feel for what that will look like?
Sure. So we've developed a short YouTube video. Let's see, let's get this up to where we can see it. And then a flyer to help with that, and a video and a letter introducing the tool. So let me pull over. So let's go to our YouTube site.
Yeah, so while she's bringing that up, I'll talk through those 3 things. So that letter that's
the national emergent.
Yeah, so that letter that would be coming through Eric's office, that's promotional, right? You can distribute that broadly. We also have a flyer that's kind of promotional. This will be a reporting tool for the EMS agents, for the agencies to determine how most efficiently to complete the reporting tool.
And then we've also got the flyer. It'll take me a minute to pull up the latest edition of the flyer.
Okay. While she's bringing that up, any questions related to any of these tools, their relationships, and how the data will be shared back out to states or to federal representatives?
Hey Clay, Felicia from Utah.
Hi, Felicia.
Did you mention how it's going to be reported through our reporting systems, our EPCR systems, or another way?
Oh, right. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, for sure. And so actually on the NEMSIS website where you go to look at your state reports, there is just a new state report that's added there now. So here, for example, is the flyer that will be made available to states and to you vendors to go ahead and share that out. So that will be valuable. I'm gonna, may I share my screen again just quickly, Julianne, if that's okay?
So is the data captured on our vendor websites, or how is the data captured then? The reporting to us, that information, or through a different website reporting tool?
Right. No, if you just go to the NEMSIS website and you were to access, and so hopefully people can see my screen. If you go to state reports just as you do now, it's just right here, right? And if you opened it now, Felicia, you'd see the dashboard, but there would be zero information for Utah.
So
and she's asking about how the data gets in.
Yeah.
So that red
reporting,
cap form that you showed.
Yeah. How are we doing the red cap then? Yeah. Who's reporting into there? The agencies themselves, or we are, or how is that data in the red cap captured?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, this is to each of the individual agencies to complete.
And we've been already kind of capturing this data with actual law enforcement and dispatch as well. Could we kind of include them if we wanted to in this whole thing, instead of making them double report?
Sure.
Thanks, Eric.
And to piggyback on that question, we also already capture this information. I know we talked about it earlier, but I have to ask again because this is the pushback I get. Our agencies report to our local public health agencies, as well as the state sort of EM resource tracking system. And now this, is there any way that we can export it from one of the other systems to get it to you rather than having them fill out 3 forms?
This is an issue that Eric's been working hard on. Eric, do you want to speak to this just a little bit?
Yeah, so we're going to reach out to you specifically to see what we can do. I want to see how we can do that, but it's going to be obviously state specific or entity specific because everybody is approached it a little bit differently. So I need to take a look at what you have. Ironically, not ironically, but I did go back after you said that the first time and looked at what got reported up to the federal level from your region, and that wasn't a part of the report. So that I guess that's my concern, is that I think some of this is getting reported in some locations. However, it's just not making it all the way through the food chain. And I don't know if it's because it's in states or services or areas where EMS is a part of the health department, and it's getting, I won't say blocked, but it's not getting past the health department, or it's not past the local emergency management agency. But for whatever reason, this is not making it up to the federal level. But so yes, absolutely. We'll reach out to you and see how we could do this to streamline the process. I don't want anyone doing duplicative data by any means. It may be that we take an individual state in a separate way. If you have a standardized process, let's see if we can work with that to pull that in here.
Yeah, sorry to be the thorn in the side, but you know, and I'm happy that you say that, because that's what our EMS agencies have been frustrated with, is that they are reporting to the regional level, and then it's, you know, their requests aren't being fulfilled. So that's not a new sentiment experience. So I think it would help a lot.
It's certainly not. In fact, these national data committees that we talked about, these subject matter expert groups that, you know, we've been trying to kick these things off with everything else that's going on, has just been nuts. But that is one of their main things to look at is, you know, for all the things we're collecting, are we doing it the right way? And are we doing it, you know, are we doing it in a duplicative way? Are there things that we're asking for that just make no sense? And then, but I do have to say it's interesting, and you know, I've only been in this position for about a year now, and you're always making somebody happy and somebody mad, and I can kind of accept that and live with that. But the part that's interesting is the different approaches that I'm seeing, and the added lists and the added elements to lists and things by states, and in some cases localities. I'm not sure where the problem really lies, and I'm really trying to work on figuring that out. The other part that still perplexes me in all of this is that we add things because it happened, and it might have happened twice in a million records, or twice, and that became the addition or the reason for the change or the modification. But then, you know, another year from now, it doesn't apply, but we don't go back and take it out. So in working with Clay and trying to identify what those things are, and that's one of the tasks for this SMB committee looking at the data side, is how can we streamline this approach? Do we need all this stuff? Is it important? And then just my final comment, the part that's really tricky is one state, it's a hill to die on. It's like an absolute, we got to have this. And this really ties back to the medical directors in some cases too. This is like, you would think, the most important data element in there, and you go to 10 other states and they don't even collect it or care about it. So it's kind of interesting to look at it from that perspective. So I know I digress, but the answer to your question is we will certainly look at how to pull this in to prevent duplicative data. Over.
All right, any other comments regarding the tool or the dashboard?
So one more time, sorry, where is the reporting tool going to be located at for them to enter their data at?
So they will just go to the NEMSIS website and it appears right here.
Oh, okay, right on the main page.
Yep. And then they'll click here and it will open up this form.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Felicia.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
This is Anne from Arizona, and I think I just spoke over someone. I'm sorry. I just wanted to find out if some of the resources are going to include anything that potentially we could use as a way to promote this to our agencies. Does that make sense? You know, just like,
yeah.
A synopsis of something we could kind of send out.
Yeah. So we'll have the letter is going to be coming from NHTSA Office of EMS that will introduce the idea and why it's important, how this will provide a more direct route for state and federal reporting. It'll indicate what it is and what it is not. That will be available. We have a promotional flyer that you will be able to send out to all folks. And then we'll have the instructional stuff in place as well, including the YouTube.
So is this form final then?
Yes, the form is final, and so as I mentioned, as soon as you see promotional kind of information coming out of either Eric's office or through the NEMSIS Google group, then you're free to make this URL available to any of your users.
Okay, I was curious why you didn't ask for an email address.
Say again, David.
You didn't ask for an email address for contacting?
Contact email addresses for who, Dave? Sorry.
So people completed a report. Yes or no, we did not. We limited that to telephone numbers because the thought was that for those that are presenting with urgent need, the contact would be direct by telephone, and that individual was not going to be sitting around scanning emails, that they were going to be busy. So we were looking for direct access, not an email box.
Okay.
We originally had more information in here and we pared it down as much as possible to make it streamlined.
In a comment from Jim Hawley, we can use this link to directly bring folks from your software to this location, and that's correct. Any other questions? All right, Julianne, I'll stop sharing. We're out of time. We're a couple minutes over. I want to respect everybody for the really diligence that you have shown in being on this call by ending on time. We clearly have enough information for another entire call, so I apologize for that. Things just kind of came up very quickly here. I will just mention very quickly for Julianne that we have provided most of the tools that you requested that were related to transforming suggested list to defined list. Those were sent out via the Google group. Feel free to review those. In fact, it might be great if you had some familiarity with those before we hold our next call, but we will certainly cover those on the next call. So much of what you see here, we'll make sure it gets covered that wasn't covered today. So I'll just ask for any questions or other things that folks would like to tack to make sure that we're discussing on these calls before we end. All right, well, thank you everyone for sticking with us. If you have any comments or questions related to anything that was presented here, clearly there's was some requests for some of the things we provided to be made available to you in in an electronic form. We'll be working on that, ensuring that you have everything to keep you as up to date on these topics. So again, thank you very much for joining, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.